this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Streaming May 15th on Paramount Plus. Beth and Rip are back in Dutton Ranch.
This life here is gonna work, isn't it?
We'll make it work. Starring Kelly Riley.
A legacy is a beautiful thing, but only if it survives.
Cole Hauser.
What's gonna work?
Ed Harris.
Family is the only thing worth fighting for.
And Annette Bening.
I can make this a lot harder for all y'all.
And peace will have to wait.
Dutton Ranch. New series streaming May 15th on Paramount Plus.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
Dan Schneier is a senior editor at CBS Sports and a co-host of the Big Blue Banter podcast. He previously has done work at Pro Football Focus and Fox Sports. He's a Giants fan, he's a film grinder, and contrary to popular belief, there is no D in his last name. These are his late-round perspectives. I've been typing your name more frequently than I would otherwise be doing, obviously, because you're on the show and I'm putting together the show sheet and all that kind of stuff. How frequently do you get a D in your name versus it not being in your name?
It's just constant. It's been my entire life. I think even when people don't see the D and pronounce the D, they just have no clue how to pronounce this last name, even though it's like easy to, if you just think of like Schneider without the D, but it just confuses people, and it's been confusing for everybody my entire life. So that's my life. Yeah,
it's wild. It's like it's just one of those names. There's some names where like whenever I type them out and I'm typing them, I never will, like, for some reason, Trey McBride's last name, I always put McBridge for some reason, right? So like every time I'm putting that G in there for some reason, and with yours, I'm typing it out and I just keep putting the D in there, and I'm not meaning to put that in there. Do you get Schneider more than Schneier in general?
I think I get Schneier the most. That's the one I get the most.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Man, I mean, as someone who can, feel for you with the exactly. Last name mispronunciations, I totally get it. Totally.
And I gotta be honest with you, I've never done one of these cold opens in a show ever. I had no idea what to expect. So I hope I didn't mess that up too badly.
No, you didn't. Look, look, you can't mess up the cold open any worse than, there was one episode that I did with John Daigle last year, good friend. And he hopped on and I was just like, Daigle, how's it going, buddy? Like that was it. That was the cold open. No, this is perfect. That's a perfect way to, I like doing the cold open because you just get right into it and you're able to kind of, break the ice a little bit. And, it at least gives a little bit of a different, like from a listener perspective, they're jumping in literally when cause like most shows that we do, 99% of them that don't have cold opens, people don't necessarily know this, but like there are some shows we'll go on where we're having conversations for like a half hour before the show starts and then again for a half hour after the show ends. And, at least with this, you're cutting off that beginning part and you're getting all of the discussion.
I like it.
Yeah. All right.
Interesting.
This is your first time on Perspectives. So I want, the audience, if they're not familiar with your work and what you do, to sort of get to know you. So talk about what you're about, what you do, your Giants fandom. I almost made a D and Giants defense joke in there, but I decided not to. It
might have landed. It might have landed.
Yeah, it would have been a little rough. No, I was just gonna say, talk about like everything about like what you're doing, like your come up and how you got into this crazy game.
Yeah, appreciate that. I did need to start the show though first by thanking you. It's an honor to be on the show, dude. I've followed your work forever.
Thanks,
been
man.
a huge fan of your work forever. Can literally word for word, this is kind of sickening, but word for word recite the Living the Stream intro song.
Oh God.
I don't know
You're
how.
one of those sickos.
I'm one of those sickos. I don't even know how I still have it in my head. Like, not to be offensive, but I haven't really listened to the show as much in the last couple of years because I'm so busy. And I still can hit that intro word for word. And I think it's the best intro in sports, but love the work you do.
Thanks.
I love the transition you've made. The solo show, it is not easy to solo podcast. It is a really difficult thing to do. So I thought it was really impressive that you took that leap and you were able to execute it the way you have. So thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks.
Definitely a big honor to be here. As far as my journey's gone with this whole job and this career, it started out of nowhere for me, at least. I've always loved football. My dad took me to my first fantasy football draft at 8 years old. It was an auction draft. I'm the biggest auction proponent. And since then, I've just been hooked. We were reading Matthew Polite columns on Roto-World. And then for school, I went to Wisconsin. I was going to just do advertising and that was going to be my career. Like my parents were always like, you can't do any of the stuff you want to do. There's no value to that. There's no career ahead. And I was working my first job, which is a video advertising job in the city, commuting every day from my parents' house in New Jersey, JJ, the most miserable commute of a lifetime, waking up every morning like, I don't know if I can do this again another day. Yeah. And in that time period, Chris Wessling, who I don't know if you're familiar with Chris. Yeah. Fortunately, rest in peace. One of the greatest dudes, put out a tweet. It was 2012. Twitter was basically nothing. It was a few thousand people at the time, probably. And his tweet was just, this Roto-World account is so poorly managed. I can't believe it. Kind of just like venting at the moment. Like he had so much to do. He couldn't do that. And so I found his email, I think at that time via LinkedIn or something. And I've just said, listen, I'll run this account for free. I just want an opportunity. Did that. Met Mike Clay through that, who gave me an opportunity at Pro Football Focus. And then it's kind of jumped from there. And I've moved over to CBS Sports and then Fantasy Football Today. And obviously now Jacob and I, for those who aren't aware, we have a new show that's debuted this year. Last year we were doing it as well, but we have our own channel now, which is exciting. And it's Fantasy Football Today Beyond the Box Score, where we do a lot of deep dives into the film and the advanced stats. So it's been a really fun journey for me. I get to do what I love, JJ. So I'm excited.
That's awesome. There's also a lot of like intertwining with people with both of our careers and such. Cause you mentioned, so first off, people don't even know this. I probably have brought it up on a Perspectives episode, but before I got to Number Fire, which was in 2013 is when I got that job. There was a year period where I launched the Late Round Quarterback ebook. And, that's sort of when like Living the Stream started and stuff. And I got gigs at like a one-off sort of article series with Roto-World. That was one of my bigger like breaks, if you will, talking to Silva. And he just kind of wanted me to do a quarterback series on there. But then also I wrote for PFF. I did 3 articles for PFF under Mike Clay. And so we had that where that's how I got introduced to Clay. That was before, pre-ESPN days for Clay. And then you working with Gibbs now is crazy too, because Gibbs started his sort of journey and doing all of this fantasy stuff with me at Number Fire. Like that's where that all began for him. And so he's one of those people where I look back and I'm just like very proud of like what he's been able to do. Scott Barrett and Graham Barfield both started under me at Number Fire as well. And, Chris Raybon, another one who's just been absolutely
it's a great coaching tree.
I feel amazing about, obviously they're the ones putting in all the work, but, it's great that like, I can at least look back and say, like, I can literally see how far so many of those guys have come and how far I've come. Like, there's, I'm a totally different analyst than I was back then. But like, just thinking back, I'm like, man, I really wish we had a better budget to be able to, have held on to all those dudes.
Yeah. You could have done, but they've gone on to do great things. And I think it's worked out for everyone pretty much.
Yeah, 100%. So let's talk about you as an analyst. How would you describe your process a bit as an analyst? I actually recently was working out and I was like, I need to find a podcast. I need to listen to something. And I listened to you on the couch with Bloom. And
nice.
I loved your conversation because I love listening to people who approach this stuff differently than I do. Right. That's where I can learn the most. No offense to a Rich Rebar, a Dwayne McFarland, but like I feel like I learn more from you guys having that conversation versus me talking to Dwayne and Reeves, because Dwayne and Reeves were more than likely going to be drawing the same conclusions and looking at the same stuff anyway.
Right.
And so I want to just like talk to you about like how you are as an analyst, who you are as an analyst, and sort of how you approach the game.
Yeah, it's different. It's definitely different. I think it all kind of harkens back to like my interest in football as a game, because I've always loved the strategic part of it, the chess match, the 11 versus 11, the moving pieces. And back in 2018, when I started my Giants podcast, which is Big Blue Banter, I wanted to be a film-based podcast. So I found a co-host, Nick Turchin at the time, who's now working as a football coach. That's how like advanced he was. And I was like, teach me how to watch the game, teach me how to watch film, and teach me what I should be looking for from a film standpoint. So I worked with him. He taught me a lot. And now my new co-host, Nick Falato, same type of deal. Like went to the scouting academy, learned the game, played football, teach me how to learn this game better. Mm-hmm. And from that, I've really become an analyst that really focuses mostly on what I see on film. And it's not necessarily all film based. I don't want to say that, because I believe, honestly, fantasy, a lot of the time you just have to understand situations. Yeah. But I do feel like my advantages come from honestly being deep dive into the draft. Like when it comes to the offensive line, I know every offensive lineman from the top 15 of each position group that are coming to the NFL. And I know what kind of offensive lineman they are. Mm-hmm. So I know how they're going to impact the team they're drafted to. I know how they're going to fit the run scheme. I know how they're going to fit the blocking scheme and the pass game. And I use that to my advantage. And when it comes to the situation, to me, it still is one of the major factors in predicting fantasy success. Who's around you? What kind of role are you going to have on that team? And then what do I see on film that I think can fit that role? A lot of the players we're going to talk about today, I like or dislike them based on their fit in the scheme and what they were drafted to do. So for me, it is mostly film. It's 90% film based. And that's not necessarily just evaluating which players are best on film, but it's which players fit the schemes they're going to be drafted into and they're going to play in.
If you were to say like when we have the film versus analytics discussion, which happens all the time, has been happening since I started in the space. Yeah. Right. Like, and it's silly. It's kind of dumb, just because like we shouldn't be bucketed the way that people bucket. But obviously, like, I approach it from the standpoint of like, I know what I can bring to the table. And so I'm going to bring that thing to the table, while also, I mean, again, if you go back and you listen to me 10 years ago and you listen to me now, I'm very much talking more about real football concepts today than I was 10 years ago, because I think it's really important to like try to at least grow where you're deficient, while also hopefully, emphasizing and doubling down on the stuff that you are good at, right? What do you think, this is sort of off topic, but I think it's still pretty related. What do you think are like the advantages and disadvantages to those approaches? Like for your film-based stuff, like where do you think people can go wrong often? Because we have plenty of like strictly film related and focused folks. I mean, like Chris Harris, for instance, has made his entire career off of watching film. And I think Bloom is more film based, or Waldman is more film based.
Right.
But where do you, and obviously you being that way, where do you think there are some drawbacks? Then we can also talk about that from an analytical perspective. And I would love to hear your perspective of where that could be from an analytical perspective.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I want to make it clear, it's not, I kind of phrased that wrong. It's not like I'm only relying on the film. I think Jacob Gibbs, who's my co-host, has done a great job of marrying the two. And he used to be all analytics. Now he's trying to move into film. I'm trying to go that other route. Like focus, factor in the analytics, factor in all of the things that are coming up. But I think where you can go wrong when you rely on the film is pretty obvious. It's sample size based. You're not getting a chance to watch enough. You're using, and look, there are times where I honestly do believe this as an analyst, especially when you're watching specific position groups. You can watch one or two games, and as far as projecting them to the NFL, I'm talking about college to NFL. Yeah. You can get a feel for exactly what their traits are, what the coaches are going to see in them, and what the coaches are going to try to get out of them. And a lot of the times, you're going to get more out of watching the full sample size of their games as far as, are they consistent on a down-to-down basis? And that does matter to coaches. And ultimately, sometimes players' careers fizzle out because they're not consistent on a down-to-down basis. But if you watch a 6-game sample size, you can see what the traits are and how to project them. But you're always going to be limited by sample size if you're watching the tape. You're also going to just be limited by things that are really predictable based on the things that you've gone over and other great analysts like yourself. Like if you're an older player and you're dominating against the players you're watching on tape, 24 years old, 25 years old against 18, 19-year-olds. It's very hard to adjust that. There's another example of a player we're going to talk about today where I loved his tape and I'm buying in on this player, but it's against a really low level of competition. Right. And I have to project how I think he's going to look against a real level of competition. Yeah. I mean, and then you see it too. Like when you watch the tape, I remember going over it with my co-host, Nick, one of these players we'll talk about today. And he's like, yeah, this is awesome. And I see what you see, Dan, but this cornerback's technique is so bad on this play. And we're going over each rep and we're like, you're right. Like this technique is horrible. And a corner's never going to, that's never going to happen at the NFL level for this receiver. So It's interesting.
Yeah. And then like when it comes, and I agree, like, but to be fair too, like, I don't want to act as though analytics solve those problems in totality. The schedule stuff and the opponent stuff, like that's still not like easily capturable. Not only that, but I would argue that there's not enough going on of that in the fantasy space, like in the analytics space. Like I really if you guys have read like the prospect guide or like looked at the ZAP model over the last 5 years and like seen the iterations of it and stuff, really only in the last 2 or 3 years have I done a lot of the adjusting for program strength, in at least more detail in a more like processed way. Before it was kind of uniform and just not as like formulaic, but I found so much more signal in doing it in a more processed way. And I think that that's still not as like people still aren't doing that enough. So like, I think that still applies to both. And then and I'm just curious about this because I don't want you to think that you're going to like offend me or anything like that, because you won't, in terms of like how how you might view analytics or something. But like, as someone who might not be like model building or going in, like, where do you think analytics aren't seeing what you would be seeing on film?
Okay. The biggest thing for me is that I don't necessarily, and this is a problem that I don't know how to avoid and I don't know how to fix, but there's just a lot of times where I don't think the charting checks out with what I'm seeing on the tape. For example, like catchable, whenever we're going over receivers, like, contested catch rate. Yeah. That's a great example of where, for example, Oscar Delp was a prospect that I liked a lot in this class. Doesn't have a lot of production at the college level. And then I see all this stats about his catchable target rate is horrible. He's not catching any special. Then you go back, and I was lucky enough to have someone do this for me on Twitter, and they charted all of his quote unquote what was charted as, or they put the film cut up of all of his quote unquote catchable targets. And pretty much across the board, it's just Gunnar Stockton throwing the ball late, not on time, high, off target. And for some reason, they're considered catchable. There's a wide range though of what's considered catchable target and not. And it's not really parsed out, in my opinion, correctly, or like one catchable target is not worth the same as like what this not so catchable target that's kind of a catchable target is charted as. So the charting is probably my number one issue, I would say, with just models, like what's being charted. And then I'm trying to think of anything else that like doesn't check out from like charting to the tape. I think that like, I don't know. I don't know necessarily why I'm not necessarily against using models to kind of find things, but I think the other thing for me actually would be this, JJ. I play fantasy in a way where I'm trying to either win first or get last. Like I don't want to be going for that. So I think the NFL is built kind of on outliers in fantasy. For example, like some of the best players that have emerged in fantasy have been outliers. And so that's another factor for me. I think the models are trying to focus on like, I'm not saying it takes away the idea of the importance of the outlier, but it's essentially telling you like these guys are outliers. So maybe they might not succeed. And more times than not, they're not going to succeed. But if I find the guy that I think can succeed, I'm willing to maybe take that chance. And I don't know if that makes me a good analyst. It's just kind of the way I play fantasy though.
No, I think it's a valid thing to bring up. The player this year that's kind of interesting in that bucket is like a Jadarian Price, for instance, right? Where like, production profile is just so weird because but there's the context that's needed and stuff. I think that from my perspective, with when it comes to numbers and the number driven analysis, like I've tried to open my mind more to, like not necessarily buying in, but to me, it's about like the cost benefit side of things. It's like understanding that the outliers will exist, but not necessarily spending up to assume the outlier. Yeah. Yes. So like if you're really into some wide receiver, like if you really like Zachariah Branch, let's say, right? And obviously Zach Branch had really weird usage in college that's not necessarily like super transferable or easy to recognize and how that would translate into, NFL production and such. You can still say I like him because I like the upside, because he would be somewhat of an outlier from that perspective. But and you can recognize that even through data. But then my thing is always like, all right, let's make sure that we're not drafting him over Cardell Tate or Jordan Tyson, or something like that. You know what I mean? So I think it's all valid though. I just wanted to hear your perspective on it, because I think it's an interesting discussion to have. And I think people always want to hear, both sides, because they hear it from me all the time. They need to hear it from smart people like yourself.
I appreciate that.
One thing I do want to talk about, people are sick of this topic probably, but I really want your perspective on it and someone else's angle on it. We're seeing all of this chatter right now about teams reaching for players versus the consensus big board. You know, we saw it with the 49ers in particular. Do you think that this matters at all? Like deep down, and is it, or do you think that it's valid to be, you know, do you think it's valid to be somewhat concerned about how these teams are approaching, you know, the big board debate?
To an extent, yes. I mean, look, it's very interesting. So I think in doing so, when a team does this and they're like, you know, we know more than you, we don't care, we trust our eyes. It's similar to the outlier discussion in some ways. Like the 49ers are a great example. Like they've missed on all these running backs where they felt like they knew more than us on.
Right.
And that's been bad. At the same time, they also found George Kittle in round 5. They also found Fred Warner in round 3. These are 2 of the best draft picks by any team or any draft class in the last 10 years. So finding those outliers at times has really provided helpful for them. So then the question comes down to, like, as a team building your roster out, and this is not fantasy related, it's just more like roster building related, but what's more valuable to you? Finding a George Kittle or a Fred Warner every now and then, or missing on some round 3 or 4 picks that ultimately don't play a huge role? If you look at, we'll go over some of the numbers later, but like, for example, there's only been 3 receivers in the last 12 draft classes that were drafted in round 3 out of a 54 receiver sample size. And I shout out Adam Mazer for the stat. He told me this on Fantasy Football Today, that have scored 10.8 or more on average fantasy points per game in PPR and full PPR. That's how unproductive the round 3 has been for wide receivers. So these picks, we tend to put a lot on them. We make a lot of it. It's our game. We're looking to go deep. But like ultimately in the NFL, when you get outside of the top 50 overall, you kind of need an outlier to make an impact on an NFL team. There's not as much safety. There's not as much like floor as people seem to prescribe to it. So I think if the 49ers were doing it earlier, it made more sense. And this year they did with Stribling, right? Like at 34, that's a pretty premium pick that they decided to use on a player who's going to have to be an outlier from a success standpoint. But ultimately what I think that it comes down to is this, JJ. There's 2 factors that we're never going to have when we build out our consensus boards. When the analysts make their big board, for example, one, they're going to have nowhere near the medical information that these NFL teams get on these players. Okay. They have none of that. So that's a huge factor in which players fall and which players are drafted higher and lower. The second is none of the people and these are great draft analysts who put together that, you know, the consensus board that Arif puts together. Yeah. It's from really smart people, but none of them have any access to interviewing these players. They don't know who they're going to be. They don't know what they're about. They don't know the human side at all, really. I mean, they could read Dane Brugler's work in the Beast and it's great. He gets into the human side a little bit, but it's nowhere near like what these NFL teams have access to from the interviews, from having like scouts just follow these guys around and see them in season, how they operate. So those 2 factors that are always lost make me think that like I do respect and appreciate the consensus big board, but it is missing information that these NFL teams have.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I think the data that I've researched, which I think is interesting, that it shows that values in terms of big board versus actual, right? Like where guys get drafted, the values really aren't any better than the guys who are like slight reaches, let's say. Like the guys who are massive values, technically the guys who are slight reaches are better value or better producers versus expectation than the guys who are huge values, because the guys who are huge values likely for the stuff that you're saying, where they fell in the draft because of bad interviews, because of medicals, because of whatever the case may be, and they're falling round after round. That's so many data inputs that we're getting from team after team after team after team, whereas a reach is just one team being like, yo, we really liked you that well in the second round, you know, we really want to go that route. So it is interesting, you know, like I'm obviously someone who's going to come from the perspective of like wisdom of the crowds probably is better than we want to admit that it is. And this is an imperfect science to begin with.
Right.
And, you know, there's something to be said about like getting your guy. Yes. I think that's something that like, I don't want to dismiss at all, because it does matter. Like it matters in fantasy, right? Like we reach for guys in fantasy because we want our dudes. I get it. You know, I get it from that perspective. But then there's also sort of like the humility aspect of it, you know, where like, okay, but if I can get this guy, you know, if I recognize that this is a probability driven thing and I can get this, like if I have a 70% likelihood that this guy is going to hit and a 65% likelihood that someone else is going to hit, then I should be okay with maybe foregoing that player and trying to extract more value, and then know that the fallback plan is still there. Now, look, if your evaluation says that Dazon Stribling is so much better than every other wide receiver that's left, I think it's fine to like take him where you took him. My thing is also what I want to follow up here with is doing that consistently. I saw this tweet that I thought like really captured the whole reaching conversation. I think I said this on the show before, but it was something along the lines of, reaching for players in the draft is like breaking the law, where, if you do it, people are going to do it every once in a while, you're going to speed, you're going to just do something that's not very intelligent. But if you do it over and over and over again, that's when you start to get in trouble, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I felt like with those 49ers picks this year, where, you get Stribling. Okay. Like we can forgive that. It's not like there was an obvious, to me at least, like easy go-to wide receiver on day 2 this year. Like I thought the NFL got it right with who went earlier in the draft, generally speaking. And so from that standpoint, if you want to fill need or if you really saw something out of him, fine. But then you go back and then you get Kalen Black in round 3. And my question to you, like, do you think that the dynasty market is sort of not correcting enough for where the 49ers drafted these guys? Or do you just see this as it's the 49ers, they're reaching, we've seen them bust with the Ty Davis prices of the world at running back. Maybe Deshaun Stribling is something. Like, how do you feel about these players and how the fantasy community has reacted?
For me, it's just always going to be individual. For me, I'm never going to look at it in a group like that. And I just have to make my evaluation based on what I see and how I project it and go from there. So I'll just touch on those two individually for a second. Stribling's one of my favorite players in Dynasty. I have him ranked very high.
Nice.
When I watch Stribling, I see 2 things that I think are really good for his chances of making it work in the NFL. One, he's going to come in and immediately be one of the best blockers in this class. Him and Malachi Fields were, to me, the 2 best blockers on tape and also the 2 best projected blockers, meaning they have the frame to actually block at the NFL level versus NFL DBs and when they're used as insert blockers near the line of scrimmage. Now, why is that important to me? It's going to get him on the field early. Why is that important to me? Because then he has a chance to produce more and score more. Like a lot of the times these players drafted round 2, 3, like I mentioned with round 3, they just don't get on the field early as we expect them to, and they don't get the opportunities we expect. But the big reason I love Stribling is I feel like the 49ers saw something in him on his tape that they feel fits their system and their scheme, the Shanahan scheme, perfectly. And what do I mean by that? It's the ability to win on the over routes, those in-breaking routes. He creates awesome separation on those routes. And when I think back to like what they got out of Ayuk, it's not the vertical stuff. Ayuk was a great vertical player coming into the draft. That's how people viewed him, where Ayuk became a really dominant, like if you look at the numbers, great yards per run, all the per target metrics, was his ability to win on those in breakers, those deep overs. And the whole 49ers system is predicated on those deep overs. That's all the Shanahan, Kevin O'Connell, you watch all these coaches, less so McVay, but they're winning on these deep overs that are created via the run game, that are created via the action in the run game, even the play action run game. And he's just going to fit that like a glove, man. And then the post catch, when he catches the football on those, you see the speed. Like I see the speed after the catch. I see him breaking away from defenders. I feel like I saw some stats on his GPS testing was in the 22, 23 mile per hour range. And I know from just like the 40 time, it was 4.37. I feel like the fit is just there for him. He's going to get on the field because of his blocking, and they're going to use him on those routes that Ayuk was winning on and Debo was winning on. And to me, I get it. The age sucks. He's old. He's an older prospect. The production profile is not there. But from a schematic fit standpoint and from the things I see him do well on tape, I think they translate really well to what the 49ers are going to need him for.
Do you think there's a reason that like his, if you look at like NFL mock draft database, like when I published the prospect guide for the pre-draft version in middle of March, his projected draft capital was 172nd overall or something. And it was funny because he was like the one profile where I was like, analytically, you don't have to be concerned with Stribling unless his draft capital surprises. Like I literally used that phrase.
Hit it to a point. Yeah.
Good thing I used it for that player because that was the guy where it was surprising. But his consensus, I know we talked about consensus big board and stuff, but I'm saying it more so because that's being driven by how people are evaluating these players, right? Is the big board. And he just rose and rose and rose and rose. Okay. Like, he goes 172 to his finished big board rank on NFL mock draft database was around 90. So while some people had like never heard of the dude before, like if you were tracking big boards and you listened to like a Brugler or something, you knew that he was rising the ranks at the very least, And so it wasn't like as shocking that he went. I think it was shocking that he went early round 2, but day 2, I think it was probable that he was going to go day 2. My question though is like, why do you think that happens? Like, why do you think is there a groupthink mentality going on here? And obviously, like, I say this to you because you're coming from the standpoint that like Stribling's a decent prospect, right? And so I really want to know like how that kind of comes to be, like how he goes from being someone that people are thinking is like a day 3 pick, a project, whatever the case may be, to then all of a sudden being looked at like this. And then you have people who, like yourself, who are obviously objectively just like doing the work and you're just evaluating them and that's it. But then now after the fact, you have all of these like talking heads in the media that are like trying to save face for the 49ers and like saying all these good things about Dazon Stribling that they weren't saying beforehand. And I'm just curious, like, how or why you think that all like came to be and how that happened.
Yeah. How does the process come to be? I think a lot of it ultimately for me is a lack of information. That's not to knock anyone or anybody.
Yeah.
But the reality is a lot of these people, if we have a consensus draft board that we're talking about and we're referencing here, a lot of them are based on one analyst's evaluation of the class, right? So that's one person trying to put together a big board of 250, 300 prospects. Now an NFL team has how many people working on that? Mm-hmm. How many people are watching them during the year when maybe some of these analysts are doing other things that they have to do for their work during the year? Ultimately speaking, if we're honest with ourselves, the teams are putting a lot more time and work and resources into evaluating the class as a whole. I'm not talking one individual player. Yeah. I'm talking just 300 plus or whatever it may be, 500, but you got to consider all these players for UFAs. And then also, in addition to that, they have all the information we don't have, the off-field stuff, who they are as a person, and all that factors into a player potentially becoming the 30, whatever it was, 34, 37, whatever he was picked, when he was expected to maybe be a later day 2 guy, like in the 70s or 80s range. So I just think there's so much more information that these teams are working with, and we have no idea how many other teams like Stribling. We don't know the whole time. Like there could be 4 or 5 teams who are considering him that range. We'll never know that. There may be some reports that surface post draft. I always find those to be complete BS. Like the Giants are funny. They always do this. Like they took, a player this year, Colton Hood at 36, and a team traded 1 spot ahead of the Giants, the Texans, and they took Caden McDonald, who obviously the Giants wanted, but then like at the post draft presser, they're like, no, we were going to take Hood the whole time. We had him ranked ahead of him the whole time. That's like the Steelers. It's like if the Steelers
went out there and they were like, no, we didn't want Mekhi Lemon. We were just on the phone with him, just talking. We're just having a good time. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So we don't know ultimately who was evaluating Stribling in the range where he was drafted. It could be more teams than not. But I think ultimately the reality is these teams have so much more resources and time put into this, to be honest.
Yeah. And then Kalon Black, like what do you see with him? Like, was that a situation? Cause like analytically, man, I gotta really squint to find something positive here.
You got to really squint with Kalon Black. And it's funny because we did a sleeper show, Jacob and I, before the draft, and Kalon Black was a sleeper for both of us. But that was a sleeper. Like we were talking about guys ranked outside of our top 10 at running back who we like. And his film is great, but it's a translation thing. It's a projection thing. Like to me, he was the closest bet in this class. I'm trying to think if there's anyone who was closer. Cause there might have been 1 or 2. I think he's probably the closest bet in this class to be the Kyle Monangai of this class. Yeah. Like tape is just better than the analytics, and he's just somebody who NFL teams like. But the issue for me with Black is he wasn't as good on tape as Monangai, and he was a tick slower. He wasn't as good after contact, both in the metric, both by the metrics wise, yards after contact per attempt, also by the film. I don't think he was explosive, and I don't think he was as laterally agile or quick. But the 49ers clearly do. Problem being multiple things. One, like you mentioned, trading up for Trey Sermon, Terry Davis-Price, they've missed on running back over and over. 2, and this one doesn't get discussed as much, the Shanahan run scheme isn't what it used to be, man. Right. They've not really upgraded and continued to replenish their offensive line. It just keeps getting worse and worse every year. And they're becoming a team that has really had to rely on dumping it down to McCaffrey as an extension of their run game because they're not able to do the same things in the run game. Stribling will help that with his blocking, but like that's not going to be it. They need offensive line help. They need people to replenish. So like I'm just not as excited in general about the 49ers passing game anyway. Sorry, run game. Yeah.
I'm in the same boat where like I can, so like again, I think that like I'm not like overjoyed about Stribling as a prospect, but compared to other wide receiver prospects that sort of like went in day 2 and such, he at least analytically matches up with them more because I think that the wide receiver class was just like overdrafted, overrated in terms of like their actual, production profiles and how they looked when I watched them versus their actual draft capital. Right. And so if you're looking at it from that perspective, I think that Stribling makes a lot more sense. You get Xavier Thomas being drafted on day 2 and you're like that's, or Caleb Douglas, I think was a worse pick than Dazon Stribling. Even when you give the context of him going later than Stribling did. The Kalon Black thing though, I thought that they're like, I liked Emmett Johnson more, Jonah Coleman more, all the even probably like completely different back. Like, yeah, right. Like both of the Penn State backs I would prefer.
Yeah, both of the Penn State backs I would have preferred as well.
Yeah. And then like Kalen Black's 24 and a half years old. It's like there's just this complete ignorance to some of the more obvious things that we should be looking for. And I know that people are like, age doesn't matter as much anymore in this NIL era, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I would strongly disagree. There was one of the big factors last year in the model not liking RJ Harvey was the age factor, because when you adjust what they did from a production standpoint for how old they are, it mattered. It still gets signal. I know Tyrone Tracy has hit for your Giants to a degree, but it's still like, that's also a different kind of situation in general. Just given the fact that he was converted wide receiver and stuff, and he wasn't playing running back as long as some of these other prospects have. So like the Black thing is stranger for me. Like I want to be on record being like, I understand the Stribling thing, at least to like some degree. I just don't get it with Kalen Black.
I don't really either.
It's crazy.
I can't say I do. He's the third running back drafted in this class. That's just very unexpected. And
the problem with it though, in having that take, is that running back is the one position where like the talent profile matters a little bit less. And so he could still realistically be fine enough from like a fantasy perspective, but I just don't, I think that he's very much in the same bucket as like a Ty Davis Price, from the standpoint of like how excited I am versus, some of the other guys that could have been, for them.
I'm more excited about his teammate they drafted last year, personally, Jordan James.
Yeah, right. I thought, right.
Chance. Yeah.
Right. It's crazy.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
This is Jacob Goldstein from What's Your Problem? When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
So at this moment, we're looking at rookie drafts. We're doing rookie drafts. I'm curious who you think is the most underrated player right now.
So I did kind of give up the lead already, but to me, it is Dejon Stribling for sure. I mean, if you just look at the combination of things I talked about earlier, how he fits the offense, how he can win in the offense, how soon he might get on the field, how productive that offense is for fantasy and how much we like that offense, how often they're going to be in the red zone, how often they're going to score touchdowns across the board. Those things for me make him, to me at least, somebody who should be drafted way earlier than he's going. I mean, I see people drafting players over him that make no sense to me.
So let me give you some names and you tell me if you would take that player. I'm just going to think about rookie drafts right now.
Yeah. Take
Dejon Stribling or that player. Okay. We'll start easy. We'll go with like Chris Brazzell.
Yeah. Stribling.
Okay. We'll go Chris Bell.
Stribling.
Okay. We'll go with Jeremy Bernard.
Stribling.
Antonio Williams.
Stribling.
And then Denzel Boston.
Stribling.
Okay. So you're like late first Stribling.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think I had it up, but my email's being janky. I think I have him at 6 or 7 overall for me in Dynasty.
Oh, so you're okay. So you're in on Stribling. Like you're going to basically
right after KC for me, above Cooper Jr. as well.
Yeah, the Cooper thing, I actually am kind of concerned about Omar Cooper for a lot of reasons.
Very
like I thought his profile was like not like unbelievably spectacular. Now, I thought the same thing about Rashee Rice, who was his top comp in the Zap model, and I think that he could play that kind of role. But I also think that Rashee Rice found the exact, speaking of landing spot and such, like talk about like just the perfect place for him to just dominate in fantasy. I don't think he's doing that in pretty much any other location, in football.
100% true.
So like I'm nervous about Omar Cooper as well. I'm nervous about Denzel Boston. That's the thing, is that like once you get past Concepcion, that's where I'm like, realistically, anything's fair game. Like I'm nervous about pretty much every prospect that comes after that. And are you hyped on any of the day 3 rookie running backs over a Stribling, or Stribling over all of those guys?
Stribling by far over those guys. I'm perplexed by, we'll get into that in a moment, but I'm perplexed by the day 3 running backs.
Let's talk about, so same exact question. Let's talk about overrated player right now.
Yeah. The most overrated player that I've seen in this year's Dynasty rookie drafts, and maybe any since I started doing this, to me is Jonah Coleman. I don't even think it's remotely close. I don't even understand the hype personally for Dynasty. I see him going every first round, back end of first round.
He goes back end of the first,
back end of first, but every first round apparently. We're talking about a day 3 running back drafted to a team that, historically, Sean Payton was somebody who generated crazy amounts of points for the running backs in fantasy in New Orleans. But that offensive scheme is still totally different in Denver with Bo Nix. They've essentially taken all of the targets they used to give those running backs. Not all. We saw Harvey get some down the stretch. There's still going to be some at Sean Payton, but a good majority of them, and converted them into quick hitters for the receivers around the line of scrimmage. They're just doing they're running a completely different offense than the Drew Brees offense. And so we know that. We also know that for some odd reason, kind of every running back looked bad running wise behind the Sean Payton scheme last year. Their blocking scheme, they have good guys on the O-line. I have to do a bigger deep dive. This is something I talk about with Jacob a lot, but they don't generate like I expect them to at the point of contact in the run game. They don't move people off the ball. And it's not necessarily like we're seeing like great power gap play where somebody's pulling, or even zone runs being successful there. Just haven't run the ball well in Denver. So now we're talking about an offense that's not great at running the ball. A day 3 prospect who joins a crowded backfield with a player who was just drafted in round 2 ahead of him. I know, and people are out on Harvey. It is what it is on that front.
Yeah.
But like, what the heck is the hype about here? I'm not really sure what's going on here, because he's a day 3 investment on a crowded team that hasn't run the ball very well.
So here's my stance on Coleman. Number one, there's obviously a drop, like we talked about, after all those plays. There's just like, choose your own adventure. So I can understand, why he would be going where he's going from that perspective. I also think the other thing too, with like the day 3 capital and being like, I think he was like 108th overall. I think we're going to find, when we look back in like 3 or 4 years, that round 4 is the new round 3. For
running backs, or for running backs?
Okay.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. Like, because we saw Scadaboo last year.
Right.
It's like teams don't want to use that quote unquote premium pick, but once day 3 turns, they're like, sure, let's go for Bashal Tutin last year, who has an opportunity now this year. We'll see what happens with that. I think there's a possibility that happens. The thing that here's my logic, and I want to hear what you think about this with why they got Jonah Coleman, is that J.K. Dobbins was at least serviceable in an early down role for them last year. And then he obviously goes down and he's not reliable from like an injury perspective and stuff. And when I watched Denver last season, they tried over and over again to establish RJ Harvey, right?
Yeah.
Like they tried so hard to make RJ Harvey a thing, but he was just not, he bounces everything. He's just not a grinder at all. And I think that was part of the problem with his analytical profile coming out too. Where like a lot of the boosting that was going on with him was very much like I think RJ Harvey was a good sleeper type last year before he got the draft capital that he got. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people were just like in on RJ Harvey. And so, he got the draft capital that he got. And so people were just like, well, I got to stick with it because I like RJ Harvey as the player, without necessarily factoring like the changing cost and like what he actually was as a player. Right. And so last year, I don't think he looks the part of being a bell cow at all. And he then, you can look at the metrics too. I mean, 3rd worst in rushing yards expected per rush. Like, he was serviceable as a receiver. Like, he can do, the normal stuff as a pass catcher out of the backfield. And he did show off the explosiveness, at times throughout the season. So like that kind of stuff did translate. But I think Denver saw Jonah Coleman, who in my opinion in this class was probably the easiest all around running back to project as like he's just good at everything, or like fine at everything, but not necessarily elite at one thing. And they say to themselves, let's just get someone who's just a reliable body. Let's get someone who we know can do a little bit in pass pro, can catch the ball to the backfield well enough, can play the goal line if we need him to.
Right.
And in these scenarios where a Dobbins goes down and we can't rely on RJ Harvey, we at least have someone that's serviceable enough and fine enough where that elite trait might not be there. Do you think that's a realistic way to view why they did what they did with Coleman?
I think it's a very realistic way to view it. And I think you could even harken back to like some of the things Sean Payton said after he drafted Harvey, mentioned the Joker role. Like he mentioned space.
Of course he did.
Yeah, of course. Every player gets that role until no one does. But
right.
It makes sense that Harvey is a much better player in space. I mean, coming from that Gus Malzahn offense, it was my biggest concern. And same thing when I watched these Tennessee running backs. It's like, all right, well, you're seeing these super light boxes they're running into, like 6-man boxes at times, 5-man boxes. It's like, this is never going to happen at the NFL level. And obviously, as a running back, you may develop some bad habits when you're running into lighter boxes over and over again. Yeah. You have more space to work with. You'll bounce. And it didn't translate. So that was a big miss for me. I loved RJ Harvey as coming into the NFL and Dynasty. A huge miss for both Jacob and I were big on him from the film, from the landing spot. Didn't work. The question becomes like, is that how they view him moving forward? Or are they already to the point where they're like, we've seen enough tape on Harvey. We made a mistake here. We don't want to have sunk cost fallacy. Right. We're drafting a player who can replace him. Maybe. Or the other question would be, this is going to be a second year in a similar scheme, the same scheme, the Broncos run scheme. I mean, Davis Webb may be calling plays. I'm not sure if it's going to be Davis Webb or Sean Payton. Yeah. I don't think they've really decided that. Regardless, like the run scheme should remain the same. Can Harvey take a step forward from processing standpoint? Because as far as it goes from what these guys can offer them on a down-to-down basis, if you have Harvey on the field or you have Coleman on the field, there's a difference. Like you're going to have a lot more upside from not just the big play potential to me. It's the yards after contact per attempt. It's the forcing missed tackles. Yeah. It's the receiving profile that I know Coleman's is decent. And then my other question for you with Coleman would be, let's take a step back here for a second. I want to ask you this. If we just take a step back and think about him, not related to the context of where he was drafted or what the Broncos might want from him and our assumptions on that. How often, we can even take the day 3 thing out of this because I think you made a good point about that earlier. Mm-hmm. But just in general, how often do you think the prospect that you described earlier, this kind of good at everything, ends up being good for fantasy? Like what are our examples of this working? Yeah,
I think that's really fair. I think that the way that I see almost any of the guys that were drafted this year outside of Love and Price, I mean, you can even maybe throw Price in this bucket, it's a game theory thing for me where there's a chance that they give you enough hope year 1 that you can sell after year 1.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, because I do think that Coleman in this environment is going to probably see some run and get some run just because we know that they rotate their running backs and we know that he at least does something a little bit different than the other guys there do in terms of just his body, right? And how they might want to deploy him. And so if RJ Harvey, because like obviously RJ Harvey didn't have a good rookie season, right? There's a chance that he turns things around, but like, let's just like, I'd say there's a better than not chance that like he's going down this path of not hitting the way that we would want him to hit, right? And so if that's the case, then you might get a season where Jonah Coleman is seeing a decent amount of work, you know, like what we saw with like Dameon Pierce year 1, not that much work, but like just getting volume and not necessarily doing amazing things with that volume. And then typically in these scenarios, those players are flippable after year 1 in Dynasty and you make a profit and you kind of move on. And the reason I say that in like the context of this class too, is that I think we're going to see a lot of the day 2 wide receivers that we draft. Some of them, like a couple of them are probably going to emerge, right? But I'm thinking about it from like a value, year over year value perspective. And I think that we're going to like, cause they don't have these like really strong profiles to fall back on. And so if we don't get decent production from some of these guys in year 1, the market's going to react in a really negative way. And so
that's right.
In that scenario, I'll say, okay, I'll throw the dart at the Jonah Coleman type instead of the, you know, random day 2 wide receiver type, only because I think there might be more opportunity to flip that down the line.
I think that's great. And I think from the game theory standpoint, this could be where there's a hole in my game because I'm not really looking for these small profit wins, but maybe I should be because in gambling for my outliers, I'm losing a lot of value in that too when they just become the total bust. it's so hard for me to try to want that small profit win, especially when I know like at times it's really hard to flip players in Dynasty, even though it seems on surface like they like it's easy to do. Like trading is really difficult in some leagues. So yeah. I'm almost just looking more so to like roster build, like to get my biggest wins.
It's a fair point to make because I just pulled up his comps. I couldn't remember exactly who they were. So he had Doug Martin as a comp, just that's basically size related, but Martin was a better prospect.
Much
but
better,
then the other two are Zach Stacy and Zach Moss. And is Stacy not the perfect example of that? You know, like that's quite literally Zach Stacy. Like I can see the scenario where I think there's a very real chance. I said this on my show earlier this week. I think there's a very real chance that after this year, the dynasty market views Jonah Coleman more and better than RJ Harvey, right?
I think that's fair. Yeah.
And in that scenario, knowing that he's not the most like incredible prospect in the world, I think he's just solid. But because of that, you will have an opportunity to probably make a profit on it.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
This is Jacob Goldstein from What's Your Problem? When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
Let's talk about Nick Singleton, right? So Nick Singleton going to Tennessee, you know, he's obviously in a crowded backfield this year with Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears, but both of them could be gone or they're both free agents next year. And, you know, Brian Dable, you know, you're familiar with the fact that he's used day three running backs in the past as rookies. Like it's not, you know, an unknown for him. I think Singleton, personally, my evaluation thought that he had a higher ceiling than a guy like Jonah Coleman. But what do you see with Singleton?
Yeah, Singleton's a fun one because I always like the prospects where opposite side of consensus on, and this is one of them because everybody hated Nick Singleton in the community, in the film community, and any community you ask. I liked him. I liked his tape. I thought he had good 0 to 60 speed, good stop and start. I thought he did a great job in zone runs of setting up the zones and then, and, you know, using that processing skill to create a lane for himself. But mostly what I liked about him from a fantasy standpoint, I broke this down with Jacob, is he was by far and away to me the highest end reps of pass protection on tape. He had reps where he was depleting people in the backfield as a pass protector. And as a receiver, he was really natural when it came to just adjusting to the football. Like he looked like what could be the best receiving running back, even though that's not outside of Love, obviously. Even though it wasn't necessarily in his profile, it's more just watching the tape and kind of making an assessment based on the skill set. So from a passing game standpoint, it's where I get really excited. But that again was for like a small win type of thing. Like I see him as mostly like a passing down back who can have create a couple explosive plays here and there, mostly in the 20 to 30 range rather than the 40 to 60 range and beyond in the run game. So it's another player where like I see him really shooting up these dynasty rookie drafts and I'm like, I don't know if I could ever make that gamble. For me, it's tough though, JJ. I'm very anti-running back in dynasty and I'm trying to adjust that.
Yeah, I am too. Fair.
Yeah. I'm trying to adjust and improve on that because I don't like that about my process. Like I almost feel like it is a little bit biased and and this is similar in like I think when you do that from a game theory standpoint, you kind of limit yourself and you limit your ceiling because running backs ultimately are the position that if you hit right are most valuable to your team.
Yeah.
So I don't want to use that against him, but him and Coleman for me are the two most perplexing just from where they're ranked overall in Dynasty right now.
Yeah, makes sense. And then I want to ask you about Chris Bell because he's been going really, really high.
Yeah.
Obviously has the ACL. I'm getting pretty sick of the AJ Brown comps, but yeah. where are you at with Bell?
So Bell is a player I liked more pre-draft than post-draft, if that makes sense, because post-draft, I'm fighting against all the people who are pushing him up because of the situation, which I didn't really want to happen. I wanted him to be drafted into a quote unquote bad situation with a good quarterback that people are, it's so crowded, and let him have time to develop, because I think now you have to draft him at a price point where I'm open to it because I have him ranked so high because I actually liked his tape. It's more so the skill set that I like. It's similar to Stribling. It's these guys who can win on the over routes. That's where everything is made today in the NFL. I think Jacob just put up great stats on this yesterday. The difference in the NFL from an EPA standpoint on passes thrown over the middle versus outside the numbers, it's staggering because, again, it makes total sense to us, right? With where the NFL is moving meta-wise, so many teams are just copying Fangio or Fangio-style principal defenses with middle of the field open, meaning there's not a one high safety closing the middle of the field. It's either cover 2, cover 3, cover 6. Regardless, the middle of the field is open. There's split safety looks. So that's where you have to win, but it requires timing. It requires a quarterback who can anticipate, throw with velocity and ball placement. But guys like Bell who can win quick and explosively and powerfully over the middle like that are going to be the guys that I think can produce consistently at the NFL level. So I do like his skill set as it translates. I'm just not thrilled about the price.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, I thought that he was like he's solid prospect from just a median standpoint, but obviously the ceiling, it's interesting because he's one of those players where analytically he was just fine. I didn't have crazy red flags or crazy green flags, but realistically, I think when I watch him and what I think about his archetype and how that translates to the NFL, he's actually just wildly volatile. The ceiling is really high. The floor is really low.
Of course, I like a prospect like that.
Yeah, it could go the Jonathan Mingo route, but maybe it goes into a AJ Brown diet AJ Brown, route or something like that. So that's why I think that his ADP is fine, just because, again, everyone's going to be pretty rough in that range. At least he has you can squint and see that ceiling. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's fair. Totally fair.
What about any late round rookie picks this year that you're eyeing?
I saw this question. I'm going to go real late. Is that all right?
Of course. Yes. We're degenerates here. Let's do it.
To a point where most leagues, you're probably not going to have to draft any of these players, but I would add them to your rosters. We'll start with a guy who I called out as my biggest sleeper pre-draft. Thought he would go in round 5, 6, or 7. And then a team gave him, I believe, round 2 draft capital, which is insane. I might have been round 3 though. You can correct me on that. The Houston Texans selected, tight end Marlon Klein in the 2nd round. I believe, was that 2 or 3 where they got him?
Was it 2? It might have been 2.
It might have been 2. It might have been late.
Someone will correct us for sure.
Never thought he would be drafted until day 3. But I loved him because here's an example of a player whose production profile is horrible at Michigan. He didn't catch many passes at all at any point. But when I just watched him, I was like, this guy moves differently. This guy can move both on the horizontals, the over routes, but also he has some vertical element to his game. He's explosive in and out of his cuts. He can sell routes well. I feel like he can develop into a really good route runner. I think the Texans really viewed him as somebody who can win routes for us, like somebody who can just separate and get open and win in the red zone. And I'm so intrigued by him now that he had 2nd round capital, because look, if I see the skill set on tape that I like and that I think can translate from a trait standpoint to the NFL level, and then they get the capital too, I'm just going to be very excited about that player. So he's one for me.
I like that.
Another one, we're going to keep going deep here. Another one, a player that was my sleeper before the draft that got drafted into the best possible situation I could have asked out of him is Colby Young, the wide receiver out of Georgia, not Zachariah Branch, the other wide receiver. This guy, when you watch him on the tape, he pops. He's explosive on his release off the line of scrimmage. For a player who's, I think, almost 6'4", he's either 6'3" or 6'4". You don't typically see guys at that height with that kind of release off the line of scrimmage. And it allows him to stack vertically. It allows him to win on in-breaking routes as well. I just think he's got a really good skill set that was completely hidden by a junk system at Georgia that just simply was not designed to utilize him at all. And 2, really bad quarterback play at Georgia, which again, that was my big thing with Nico was my big breakout in that class. And I was like, dude, I watched him at the Senior Bowl. He dominated every route. He played the terrible quarterback play, at Michigan and in a system that didn't use him. Let's see what happens from a trait standpoint. And that one hit. There's misses, of course, when you go this route too. I'm not just going to highlight.
There'll be more misses than hits. Yeah.
Way more misses than hits, but that's another one for me. Colby Young, drafted to the Bengals. You give him Joe Burrow. Maybe this is what everyone wanted, the Alabama receiver to be. Jermaine Jeremy Burton. Yeah. That just couldn't like stay awake in meetings or whatever it was. And then the last one for me I'll give is another just super, super deep sleeper. J. Michael Sturdivant. He actually was at Florida last, but I went back and watched his UCLA tape. I really liked his ability to stack on the vertical plane, get vertical. And then once he wins vertically, which he can do with his speed, he was sub 4.4, but also just with his technique to the release off the line of scrimmage and the stacking. He's really good. Like he'll extend for these crazy highlight catches. He'll high point the football. It's like he'll win. Once he wins vertically with the separation, he'll also win at the catch point. And the Packers drafted him. Like this is just the Packers and the Steelers to me are the two teams that scout the receiver position the best by far in the NFL historically over the last 10, 15 years. And maybe is falling a little with the Steelers, lately, I guess. Like they're not as good as they once were during like, the Mike Wallace days and things like that. But, you know, that's another player that I can see totally developing to a fantasy role where he's popping off. He's on waiver wires. And now all of a sudden this guy who wasn't drafted in your dynasty drafts is on every roster.
Yeah, he definitely he broke my spreadsheets with his name.
I love that.
With the way it's formatted.
Yeah.
But yeah, he did. I was wondering where he ended up going, and it was Green Bay as an undrafted. So, good call outs as some deep sleepers for us. All right. Real quick. We only have about 5 minutes left. Let's talk about a veteran winner and loser from a fantasy football perspective stemming from the draft.
Okay, veteran winner, the biggest one for me, and this is not just because you can see the background, it has to be Cam Scatterbo, right? Like all off season, the discussion was, they're going to take Jeremiah Love, they're going to draft over him, they're going to sign Ken Walker. None of that happened. The Giants didn't even draft a single running back at all. And what we saw last year was clear. Cam Scatterbo missed all of the preseason with injury and then immediately took over as the lead back role. There was no question. There was no discussion. He was the guy because he was the best in pass downs. He was the best on run downs. And he offered something as a receiver that even though Tracy was a former receiver, he can't offer. Scatterbo's a much better route runner than Tracy. So I think, look, if he proves himself healthy, and so far the signs are good, he's already sprinting. If he comes back and he's himself, he's going to be the lead back again on a team where, you know, we're talking about Tracy, we're talking about Singletary, but the reality is this is Cam Scatterbo's offense. All they've done is help the situation around him. Right. They brought in Malachi Fields, who might be used as a power slot, which would be amazing for the run game. Obviously, Patrick Ricard, who's going to be helpful in the run game. So, and they added Francis, and they obviously their 10th overall pick, Francis Maui-Noah, was what I thought was the best run blocking guard in this class. He'll play guard for the Giants. He'll play tackle too down the line, maybe. So it's Scatterbo for me is the biggest winner. The biggest loser. Let me think of the biggest loser out of this draft. I could just go with like, it's kind of a cop out, but can we just go with Tyler Algier?
Yeah.
He's technically the biggest loser, right?
Yeah. That's a very, very quick loser. Yeah. It's not really a draft where you have the direct losers as much. So I did a show, the late round fantasy football show on winners already, and I'm doing losers next week. So I haven't even dug into like who would be on that list necessarily. But I think that part of the reason why it's harder to come up with those names is because the running back class was so weak, and that's usually the position that would just replace, you know, another running back and make it so, you know, not as relevant. Like at least when you add a wide receiver, like maybe you could say Chris Olave was a loser of some sort just because like he's splitting more work, but it's like, I mean, they're going to work together. It's a good match from that perspective. Or, you know, you could say like Wan'Dale Robinson is somewhat of a loser because of Cardinal Tape, but it's like, but he's still, they're not playing the same position really. You know, it's not, and like even where like Mekhi Lemon went, it was like, I don't know. It's just, there's just not as much of that 1-to-1. Even like Garrett Wilson with Kenyon Sadiq and Omar Cooper, hypothetically a loser, but like at the same time, we're looking at prospects that are questionable that we don't even know what kind of role they're going to play. And so are we really going to call him out as a loser? So that's probably why you had the reaction that he didn't feel the way that he did.
Yeah. Agreed.
All right. Before I let you go, who's one player? It's early May. Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't have to, you know, this can change, but who's one player that you think you're going to be drafting a ton of this year?
It's going to be another deep cut, but it is what it is.
I love it.
Player I'm going to be drafting the most of. So I want exposure to the Chargers offense. Yes, I believe strongly this is going to be one of the best offenses in the NFL. It's going to cost a lot to get Hampton. It's going to cost a lot to get Conkey. It's going to cost a lot to get Herbert. I want Trey Harris. Trey Harris is a player whose film I absolutely adored. And obviously there's a little bit of bias because I watched more Trey Harris tape than any other receiver in last year's class because of Jackson Dart, obviously, when he drafted the Giants. But his ability to get in at, he reminded me so much of what I watched with Terry McLaurin in Ohio State, the ability to get in and out of his breaks at the top of his route. And then all we've seen since, to me, is overwhelmingly positive. First of all, the Chargers used him not just as the X receiver, like he was used at Ole Miss. They used him all over. And when they were asked about it in week by the coordinators, I'm listening to these conversations, they're like, yeah, he's proven he can do everything. The way that he shows up and prepares, he can play every role in our offense. Then they started using him in the red zone, and he was featured there a little bit and made some big plays there. I just think that he's going to break out in this McDaniel system because he fits the system so well. And ultimately it is going to be tough because there's so many players on this team from a skill position standpoint. Yeah. I don't ultimately know. I even like Brandon Thompson, who they drafted for Mike McDaniel. Yeah. But Trey Harris to me is someone whose tape I loved, the fit I loved, and I just loved his trajectory. Like he played much different role than I expected in year one. He wasn't just the sacrificial X.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think that there are, like you said, there's a lot of weapons and stuff on there, but they're not super established. You know, right. Like to me, like I love Ladd. Like I think that he could blow up this year and have a great season. And I love this offense and investing in it. They get their tackles back and their offensive line is going to look so much better. Like that's huge with what's going to happen. Like Justin Herbert's really, really undervalued even right now. But yeah, like to me, if you're going to throw, like you might as well throw some darts because I think it's still pretty wide open outside of Ladd, you know, like new offensive coordinator, things will look a lot different. And then so all of a sudden, you know, there's that opportunity for a player like Trey Harris to step up.
And everyone's expecting this offense to look a lot like the recent McDaniel offenses we thought we saw. But I think that's just recency bias. I think it's going to look like the early two-a-days where like these receivers are running these deep in cuts and just getting wide open. And Herbert's just diming them up with velocity and just looks awesome out there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the last couple of years we saw McDaniel switch things up. The offensive line was so bad. And Tua. Yeah, right. And Tua couldn't do and that's why we saw Jonnu Smith do what he did and like you know, Devon Achane get like a 22% target share and stuff because that's what they were forced to do, just given personnel. You have the literal opposite problem now where the offensive line can handle it as long as they're healthy. And Justin Herbert is one of the best at just in general, but also being able to get the ball down the field.
Exactly.
Dude, this was awesome. Let everyone know what you're working on, where they can find you and where they can get more of your analysis.
Yeah, so I'm just going to shout out one thing. There's a few things I work on, but I would love you guys, if you enjoy this show and if you enjoy anything you've heard today, please check out Beyond the Box Score. You can type in fantasy football Beyond the Box Score. It's on Spotify, everything. We're also on YouTube. We're really trying to get off the ground. We are just over 1,000 subscribers. We started about a month or two ago. Really, you do a lot to help us grow by just subscribing, hitting the like occasionally on a video, you know, leaving a comment, anything like that. You'll get discussions like this, but even more because Jacob Gibbs, I call him the star of the show. I'm more of the host, but I bring a film aspect. He brings the data, the analytics, the film. He's just, to me, one of the hardest workers in the business. So I'm trying to match his energy, JJ. It's hard to do. I think this guy just doesn't sleep. He just watches tape and studies fantasy, but we've got a lot of good content over there that I think you'll enjoy.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to be hopping on your show next week.
Yes, I'm excited for that. Yep.
We'll have a good discussion there. I always love chopping up with Gibbs as well. You know, just rekindle and talk about, you know, the good old days of Number Fire back in the day when I would criticize his work and have to edit and stuff like that. But yeah, I appreciate you hopping on and chopping it up, man. It was really awesome analysis and really great talking to you. As always, guys, check out lateround.com. Make sure you are looking at that prospect guide. It's still available for order, all updated. It'll help you out with your rookie drafts, all that good stuff. Otherwise, as always, thanks for tuning in.
Lots of places can expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity, which is way more than anyone can do on their own. If we find anything suspicious, like new loans or changes to your financial accounts, we alert you right away, all through text, phone, email, or the LifeLock app. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/iHeart. Terms apply.
This is Jacob Goldstein from What's Your Problem? Business software is expensive, and when you buy software from lots of different companies, it's not only expensive, it gets confusing, slow to use, hard to integrate. Odoo solves that because all Odoo software is connected on a single affordable platform. Save money without missing out on the features you need. Odoo has no hidden costs and no limit on features or data. Odoo has over 60 apps available for any needs your business might have, all at no additional charge. Everything from websites to sales to inventory to accounting, all linked and talking to each other. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.